Before we begin, have you ever missed someone so much that even years later, a single memory could ruin your entire day? This story is for everyone who's ever loved someone they couldn't forget. For everyone who's ever wondered what they would do if they got one impossible second chance. If emotional werewolf romances are your favorite kind of story, subscribe and join us for more unforgettable journeys. Tonight's story begins with heartbreak and ends with a truth nobody expects. The kingdom of Frostmere had forgotten how to smile. Not completely. Its markets still bustled, children still played in the snow, warriors still trained beneath the towering castle walls. Life had continued. But there was one man who never truly moved on. Alpha King Darian Frostfang. 5 years had passed since the day his Luna died. 5 years since the kingdom lost its queen. 5 years since Darian lost the only woman he had ever loved. Yet every winter, on the same day, he climbed the same snow-covered hill overlooking the kingdom. Alone, no guards, no servants, no advisors, just him and her, or at least what remained of her. A single gravestone stood beneath a frost-covered pine tree. Snow had gathered around its base. The words carved into the stone were still sharp despite the years. Seraphina Frostfang, beloved Luna, beloved wife, beloved mate. Darian stared at the name for a long time. The wind tugged at his dark cloak. Snowflakes settled in his black hair. But he never moved. His icy blue eyes remained fixed on the stone. You'd laugh if you saw me now. His voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the wind. I still come here. Silence answered him. The same silence that had answered him for 5 years. His jaw tightened. You always hated when I skipped meals. A bitter smile touched his lips. The cook still complained. Nothing. No voice, no laughter, no Seraphina, just snow. The Alpha King closed his eyes. For a brief moment he remembered her smile. The way she used to look at him. The way she laughed when she thought he was being ridiculous. The memory hurt as much as it always had. Maybe more. Because time wasn't healing the wound. Time was only teaching him how to live with it. 5 years earlier, the storm had come without warning. A brutal winter blizzard. The worst Frostmere had seen in decades. Seraphina had been traveling home from a neighboring village. Her carriage crossed an old mountain bridge during the height of the storm. Then disaster struck. The ice beneath the bridge cracked. The structure collapsed. Horse, carriage, passengers, everything plunged into the frozen river below. Rescue teams searched for weeks. Warriors scoured miles of icy wilderness. Divers risked their lives, but they found nothing. No survivors, no bodies. Eventually, the kingdom accepted the truth. Their Luna was gone. The funeral happened 2 months later. Darian remembered every second of it. Every painful second. The black banners, the snow, the empty coffin, the unbearable feeling of finality. Everyone said it was time to move on. Everyone said he had responsibilities. Everyone said he needed another Luna, another mate, another future. But Darian refused, again and again and again, because there would never be another Seraphina. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, Darian finally turned away from the grave. The kingdom waited below. Golden lights flickered from windows. Smoke rose from chimneys. A beautiful kingdom. One Seraphina had helped build. One she never got to see finished. Darian mounted his horse, then rode back toward Frostmere. He had no idea that before sunrise, everything he believed about the last 5 years would change. The storm arrived after dark. Snow swept across the kingdom in violent waves. Castle guards pulled their cloaks tighter. Most travelers had already found shelter. Nobody was foolish enough to travel during weather like this. Or so they thought. Near midnight, a lone figure appeared beyond Frostmere's gates. A woman, walking alone through the storm. The guards exchanged worried glances. Nobody should have survived those conditions. Yet somehow she kept moving, step by step, through the snow, through the wind, through the darkness, until she reached the gates. Halt! The woman stopped. Her cloak was covered in ice. Snow clung to her boots. A travel pack hung from one shoulder. The older guard stepped forward. State your business. The woman lowered her head. I need shelter. Her voice sounded tired, exhausted. The younger guard felt sympathy immediately. No inns are open this late. The woman nodded. I'll take a stable. The guards looked at each other. The older one sighed, then motioned toward the gate. Let's get you warm. The woman reached up and lowered her hood. The torch slipped from the guard's hand. It hit the snow with a hiss, because suddenly, Neither guard could breathe. The woman's face was impossible, completely impossible. The older guard took an unconscious step backward, his face drained of color. No, the younger guard stared, frozen, because everyone in Frostmere knew that face. Every citizen, every warrior, every servant, every noble. There was no mistake. The woman standing before them looked exactly like the dead Luna. Word spread through the castle like wildfire, servants whispered. Guards abandoned posts. Advisors rushed through corridors. Nobody could believe what they were hearing. At first they assumed it was a cruel joke. Then they saw her, and everything changed. Darian was finishing dinner when the captain of the guard burst into the hall. The man looked shaken. Genuinely shaken. That alone was unusual. The captain had faced rogue armies without blinking. Now he looked terrified. "Your Majesty," Darian frowned. "What happened?" The captain hesitated, for perhaps the first time in his life. Then he swallowed. "You need to come with me." Minutes later, Darian entered the great hall. The room was packed. Nobles, servants, warriors. Everyone stood silent. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The atmosphere felt strange, almost unreal. Then Darian saw her, and the world stopped. A woman stood near the enormous fireplace. Snow melted from her cloak. Firelight illuminated her face. Darian forgot how to breathe. His heart slammed against his ribs. His legs refused to move, because standing before him was Serafina. Not similar. Not close, not resembling, exactly. The same silver hair, the same violet eyes, the same graceful features. Even the tiny scar above her eyebrow remained. Every detail was identical, every possible detail. For a moment, Darian wondered if he was dreaming, or dying, or losing his mind, because this couldn't be real. It simply couldn't. Yet there she stood, alive, breathing, beautiful. His voice barely worked. Serafina. The woman's gaze shifted toward him, polite, curious, confused, not loving, not emotional, confused. The look shattered him instantly, because she stared at him the way strangers stare at each other. Nothing more. Woman smiled politely. "I'm sorry." Darian's stomach dropped. The woman tilted his head slightly. "Have we met?" The entire hall fell silent. A servant dropped a tray. Nobody reacted. Nobody could, because those 4 words felt impossible. "Have we met?" Darian stared at her, waiting, praying, hoping. Nothing changed. There was no recognition in her eyes, no memory, no love, nothing. His wolf suddenly surged inside him. "Mate!" The word echoed violently. "Mate! Mate! Mate!" His wolf recognized her immediately, without hesitation, without doubt. Yet the woman continued looking at him like a stranger. "What is your name?" Darian finally asked. The woman hesitated, then answered softly. "Celine." A murmur swept through the room. "Celine? Not Serafina. Celine." The woman seemed uncomfortable beneath everyone's attention. "I don't understand." Neither did Darian, because standing before him was the woman he buried 5 years ago. And somehow, she didn't know who she was. That night nobody slept. Not Darian, not the kingdom, not even Celine, because somewhere deep inside her mind, something felt wrong. And as she stared out her bedroom window into the falling snow, a strange image flashed through her thoughts. A pair of icy blue eyes. A man's laughter. A castle covered in winter frost. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving only one question behind. Who was she really? And why did an entire kingdom look at her like a ghost? The castle changed after Celine arrived. Not overnight, not dramatically, but slowly, subtly, like the kingdom itself wasn't quite sure what to do with her. Some people treated her like a miracle. Others treated her like a ghost, and a few treated her like a threat. Celine noticed all of it, the whispers, the stares, the conversations that stopped whenever she entered a room. Nobody said it directly, but everyone believed the same thing. She was Serafina Frostfang, the dead Luna, the woman buried 5 years ago, the woman whose face she wore, yet no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't remember being anyone except Celine. 3 days passed, then 4, then a week. Still, no answers came. Darian spent most of his time observing her. At first, Celine found it uncomfortable. The alpha never stared rudely, never questioned her aggressively, never pressured her, yet she constantly felt his eyes on her, watching, searching, hoping, as if he expected her to suddenly remember everything, and perhaps a small part of him did. One morning, Celine wandered through the castle gardens. Fresh snow covered the ground. Winter roses poked through frost-covered bushes. The air smelled clean, cold, peaceful. She followed a winding stone path without thinking, without choosing, without planning. Some instinct guided her, a feeling she couldn't explain. Minutes later, she stopped abruptly, confused. She was standing before an old marble bench. The sight hit her like a physical blow. A strange ache spread through her chest. Her fingers brushed the frozen stone, and suddenly, a flash. A memory, a man's laughter, strong arms wrapping around her waist, snow falling, a kiss. The vision vanished instantly. Celine stumbled backward. Her heart raced. Breathing became difficult. The memory felt real, painfully real, yet it disappeared before she could understand it. "Are you all right?" The voice startled her. Darian stood several feet away. Concern filled his eyes. Celine nodded quickly. "I think so." The Alpha looked unconvinced. "What happened?" She hesitated, then pointed toward the bench. "I've never been here before." Darian remained silent. Celine swallowed. "At least I don't think I have." The Alpha's expression softened. "You have." She frowned. "What?" Darian approached slowly. Snow crunched beneath his boots. "You used to sit here every winter." The words landed heavily. Celine stared. "You mean Serafina?" Darian's jaw tightened. "Yes." Silence followed. Neither spoke, neither moved. Finally, Celine whispered, "What if everyone is wrong?" The Alpha looked directly at her. For a moment, his eyes seemed older than the mountains surrounding Frostmere. "What if they're not?" That night, Celine couldn't sleep. Again, the castle felt familiar, too familiar. Every hallway, every staircase, every room. It was like living inside a dream she couldn't quite remember. The feeling grew stronger with each passing day, as though something hidden deep within her mind was trying desperately to surface. Meanwhile, Darian began noticing stranger things, small details, tiny moments, impossible moments. One afternoon, Celine entered the Royal Library, a place she claimed she'd never visited. Yet she walked directly through the maze of shelves, without hesitation, without guidance, straight toward a particular section. Then she reached for a book, the exact book Serafina had read more than any other. Darian watched from across the room. His heartbeat accelerated, because Celine didn't even look at the title before choosing it. She simply knew where it was. Celine frowned at the book in her hands. "That's strange." Darian stepped closer. "What is?" She looked genuinely confused. "I don't know why I picked this." His pulse quickened. "You've read it before." She shook her head. "No." Darian held her gaze. She did. The room fell silent. Again, always the same silence. The silence that existed whenever Serafina's name entered the conversation. That evening, something unexpected happened. A servant accidentally dropped a tray during dinner. The loud crash echoed through the hall. Most people barely reacted. Celine froze. A violent headache exploded behind her eyes. Suddenly, images flashed through her mind, faster than she could process them. A ballroom, music, a wedding dress, a crown, Darian smiling, a ring sliding onto her finger, then darkness, water, screaming, cold, so much cold. Celine gasped. The visions vanished, leaving her shaking. "Celine!" Darian was beside her instantly. The hall blurred around her. Concern filled his face. What happened? She couldn't answer. Not immediately, because for the first time, the memories felt real. Not dreams, not imagination, memories. "I saw something." The words barely escaped. Darian crouched beside her. "What did you see?" Celine hesitated. Fear crept into her voice. "You." The Alpha's expression changed instantly. "What else?" She swallowed. "A wedding." Silence. Every person in the hall stopped moving, stopped breathing, stopped speaking. Darian's eyes widened. "What kind of wedding?" Celine looked terrified. "I don't know." But deep down, she did. Later that night, Darian stood alone in his private chambers. For the first time in years, hope frightened him, because hope could be cruel. Hope could destroy people. He knew that better than anyone. If Celine truly was Serafina, then everything was about to change. But if she wasn't, then he was setting himself up for another heartbreak. The next morning, an even stranger discovery occurred. A section of the castle's oldest foundation collapsed during repairs. Workers immediately informed the royal council. The damage appeared minor, until someone discovered a hidden doorway, buried beneath centuries-old stone, a doorway nobody knew existed. By afternoon, the entire castle buzzed with rumors. Darian personally led the investigation. Celine came too, though she couldn't explain why she felt drawn to the hidden chamber. The passage descended deep beneath the castle, far below the kingdom, Far below the dungeons, far below everything, the air smelled ancient, dust coated every surface. Torches illuminated forgotten walls. Finally, they reached a sealed room, and inside, time stood still. Shelves lined every wall, boxes, books, documents, letters, thousands of pages hidden away. The room wasn't a storage chamber, it was an archive, a secret archive, one deliberately concealed. Darian began examining the contents. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Old records, historical accounts, financial ledgers. Then he found something strange. A collection of journals, dozens of them, all belonging to the same person. Former royal advisor Aldrich Thorne, a man who had died 6 years earlier, 1 year before Seraphina's disappearance. Darian opened the first journal. The room grew quiet. Page after page detailed strange experiments, ancient rituals, forbidden magic. Then he reached an entry dated only months before Seraphina's accident. His expression darkened. "What is it?" Celine asked. Darian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he read aloud. "The Luna's bloodline possesses abilities long thought extinct." The room froze. Darian continued reading. "If properly controlled, such power could reshape the future of Frostmere." Celine felt a chill run down her spine. Another journal revealed even worse information. Aldrich had become obsessed with Seraphina, not romantically, strategically. He believed her bloodline carried ancient lunar magic, a power forgotten by modern wolves, a power some would kill to possess. Then they found the final entry, and everything changed. Darian's hands tightened around the journal. His voice became deadly quiet. As he read, "The Luna must disappear." The torchlight flickered. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The words echoed through the chamber. Cold. Terrifying. Impossible. Celine stared at the page. Her pulse thundered, because suddenly, a new possibility emerged. What if Seraphina never died? What if someone made sure she vanished? What if the accident wasn't an accident at all? A sharp pain exploded inside her head. Worse than before. Much worse. Images flooded her mind. A carriage, the bridge, the storm. Then a face. A man standing beside the carriage moments before the crash. Watching, smiling, waiting. Celine gasped. The memory vanished immediately. But one thing remained. The man wasn't dead. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't part of the past. He was still alive. Somewhere. Inside Frostmere. And for the first time since Celine arrived, someone else realized the truth. Because hidden within the shadows of the castle, a figure watched from a dark corridor. Listening. Waiting. Terrified. The secret buried 5 years ago was beginning to surface, and if Darian discovered the full truth, everything would collapse. The room remained silent long after Darian finished reading the journal. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The words seemed frozen in the air. The Luna must disappear. Celine stared at the page. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. 5 years. 5 years of questions. 5 years of grief. 5 years of believing she was someone named Celine. And now, for the first time, the impossible truth seemed within reach. Darian slowly closed the journal. His face had changed. The grief was still there. The hope was still there. But something new had appeared. Anger. Cold. Controlled. Dangerous anger. The kind that belonged to an alpha king. "If someone did this," his voice echoed through the hidden chamber, "they'll answer for it." The advisors exchanged nervous glances, because everyone knew what that meant. If Seraphina had truly been taken, if someone had stolen the Luna from her kingdom, then Frostmere had been betrayed from within. That night, the castle felt different, heavy, like a storm waiting to break. Darian ordered every journal copied, every record examined, every servant questioned. No one was above suspicion. No one. Meanwhile, Celine sat alone in her chambers. A fire crackled inside the hearth. Snow drifted outside her window. Yet she barely noticed either, because her memories were changing, returning, not all at once, not clearly, but piece by piece. Like broken fragments of a shattered mirror, she closed her eyes, and suddenly she saw herself standing beside Darian, laughing, happy, in love. The memory felt so real she could almost touch it. Then another appeared, dancing with him beneath crystal chandeliers. Then another, holding his hand beneath falling snow. Then pain, darkness, a carriage, a bridge, a storm, and a man watching from the shadows. Celine gasped and opened her eyes, breathing hard, the same face. Again, always the same face. The man from the memory. The one who shouldn't have been there. The one whose smile made her blood run cold. But she still couldn't remember his name. The next morning, Darian assembled his council. Every advisor, every commander, every noble. The throne room filled quickly. Tension hung in the air. Nobody knew why they had been summoned, but everyone sensed something was wrong. Darian stood before them, silent, watching, waiting. Then finally he spoke. 5 years ago, his voice carried across the room. The Luna disappeared. Silence followed. We believed it was an accident. A pause. We were wrong. The room exploded into whispers. Shock spread across countless faces, fear across others. And on one particular face, something else. Panic. Darian noticed immediately, because he had been watching for it, waiting for it. The reaction lasted less than a second, but it was enough. Lord Cedric Valewood, senior advisor to the crown, trusted servant of Frostmere, friend of the royal family, a man who had spent years helping govern the kingdom. The moment Darian mentioned the journals, Cedric's face had gone pale. The Alpha saw it, and so did Celine. Suddenly, a memory crashed into her mind, full force, violent, complete. The carriage, the storm, the bridge, and Cedric. Standing beside the horses, smiling, Celine shot to her feet, her breathing quickened. The throne room blurred. No! The word escaped before she could stop it. Every eye turned toward her. Cedric froze. And suddenly, she remembered everything. 5 years earlier, the storm had been real. The bridge had collapsed, but it wasn't an accident. Cedric had arranged it. He had tampered with the structure beforehand. He had waited for the perfect moment. The perfect storm, the perfect opportunity. But the bridge wasn't meant to kill her, only separate her. The memory continued. After the fall, she survived, barely. Injured, weak, unable to fight. Cedric's men pulled her from the river, then took her, far away, far from Frostmere, far from Darian. Celine's legs trembled. Tears filled her eyes, because now she remembered the worst part, the magic. Ancient forbidden magic, the ritual, the pain. Her memories being ripped away, piece by piece, until Serafina disappeared, and only Celine remained. Cedric! The name echoed through the throne room. The advisor's face turned white. Celine pointed directly at him. You. The room fell silent. Absolute silence. You took me. Tears streamed down her face. You destroyed my life. Cedric stepped backward. One step, then another. Panic filled his eyes, because he realized something terrible. She remembered. Guards moved instantly, but Cedric reacted first. He grabbed a hidden blade, and chaos erupted. The throne room exploded into motion. Nobles screamed. Guards rushed forward. Cedric shoved people aside and ran, straight for the exit. Stop him! Darian's roar shook the room. The chase began immediately. Cedric sprinted through castle corridors, past servants, past guards, past everything. Desperation fueled every step, because he knew the truth. If Darian caught him, there would be no escape. But nobody outran an alpha. Nobody. The pursuit continued into the snowy courtyard. Wind howled. Snow swirled. The kingdom watched in shock as the king chased his own advisor across the castle grounds. Cedric reached the outer walls, almost free. Almost. Then a massive wolf landed directly in front of him. Silver eyes, black fur, fangs exposed. Darian, in wolf form. Cedric stopped instantly. Fear flooded his face. For the first time in years, the advisor looked exactly what he truly was, a coward. Moments later, guards surrounded him. The chase was over. The lies were over. The truth had finally surfaced. By sunset, Cedric confessed everything, every detail, every betrayal, every crime. The journals had been real. The obsession had been real. He had discovered Serafina's rare bloodline years earlier. Ancient lunar magic flowed through her family. A power he wanted to control. A power he wanted for himself. So he orchestrated her disappearance, erased her memories, then abandoned her far from Frostmere, certain she would never return. He had been wrong, because fate had brought her home. The kingdom celebrated for days, not because a traitor had been captured, but because their Luna had returned. Finally, truly returned. Yet for Darian and Serafina, the hardest part still remained. 5 years had been stolen from them. 5 years they could never recover. 5 years of memories lost forever. One evening, they stood together atop the same snowy hill overlooking Frostmere. The same hill where Darian visited her grave every year. The grave still stood beneath the pine tree, covered in snow, silent, lonely. Serafina stared at it. A strange sadness touched her expression. All this time, her voice trembled. You thought I was here. Darian nodded. I did. She looked at him. Tears shimmered in her violet eyes. I'm sorry. The alpha immediately shook his head. No. His voice was firm. You don't apologize. But no. He stepped closer. You survived. His eyes softened. You came home. The wind moved through the trees. Snow drifted around them. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Seraphina whispered, You never stopped looking for me. Darian laughed quietly. A sad laugh, as if I could. Tears rolled down her cheeks, because now she remembered everything. The love, the marriage, the dreams, the life they built together. All of it. I remember our wedding. Darian smiled. I remember your terrible dancing. She laughed through tears. My dancing was wonderful. It was terrible. It was wonderful. It was terrible. For the first time in years, they laughed together, and the sound felt like healing. Then Darian grew serious. He reached into his coat and removed something small. A ring. The same ring she lost 5 years ago, the one he'd carried every day since her disappearance. Seraphina's breath caught. Darian! The alpha stepped forward, snow crunching beneath his boots. His eyes never left hers. I asked you once. His voice softened. 5 years ago. Emotion filled his expression. But 5 years were stolen from us, he swallowed. So I'm asking again. The kingdom lights glowed below them. The snow continued falling. The world seemed to hold its breath. Darian lowered himself onto one knee, exactly as he had years ago, and held out the ring. Seraphina Frostfang. Tears streamed freely down her face. I loved you then, his voice shook. I loved you every day after. A pause, and I'll love you every day that comes next. She covered her mouth, trying unsuccessfully to stop crying. So, a smile appeared on his face, the same smile she remembered, the same smile she fell in love with. Will you marry me again? Seraphina laughed through her tears, then nodded. Again and again and again. Yes! A sob escaped. Yes, more tears. Yes! The alpha slid the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms. The snow fell around them. The kingdom glowed below. And for the first time in 5 years, neither of them felt lost, because love had found its way home. Not through magic, not through fate, not through destiny, but through hope, the kind that refuses to die, even when everything else does. The end before you go, I want to leave you with one final question. If you were given a second chance with the person you loved most, would you spend your time trying to relive the years you lost, or would you focus on creating new memories together? Tell me your answer below. And if this story made you smile, made you cry, or kept you guessing until the very end, subscribe and become part of our storytelling family, because another unforgettable werewolf romance is waiting just beyond the next snowfall. Until next time, stay curious. Well, stay hopeful, and never stop believing that love can find its way home.